Hey everybody, this is Encontros por acaso number 40. So as you know, when I come up with those encontros, so I bring some friends that lives overseas, outside Brazil. So and today I have my special friend here, Ingo Averdunk. So hi Ingo, how are you?
Hola, how are you?
Good. So, I have to confess because Ingo, when we talk about site reliability engineer, that is today's subject. I mean, Ingo was my master. In fact, Ingo introduced me to this topic. And then I first learned SRE from Ingo. I'd like to say that because maybe nobody knows about that. And to support me in this transmission, we're going to have Ricardo, that is the Brazilian specialist at SRE, and is also Ingo was also his master. So I just
Yes.
just told this secret, Ricardo, just to let you
Oh,
know.
there's
Thank
no
you guys
secret.
for being with us today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so Ingo, thank you very much. So just the stage is yours.
Mhm.
Please, I know you have something to share with us, and please, just you. And whenever you go, we will start making. I will have the audience. Can send you some questions whenever they want, and you try to accommodate that.
Mhm.
Thank you, Ingo, and thank you,
Yeah.
Ricardo, for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Bezerra, for having me. I'm happy to be with you. And hello, everyone from Munich. So I live in Munich. Ingo Averdunk here. I'm a distinguished engineer in IBM. I do service management for most of my life, I guess. And the last 7 years, 8 years, I focus predominantly on the new modern way of doing operations, and that is absolutely SRE. So Bezerra asked me to talk a little bit like what's happening on SRE and what's coming next. So the title is a little bit provocative, right? What's next? Let's go right into it. And please, if you have any questions, please just go ahead and put it in the chat. I'm happy to address it. So TLDR, I want to talk about the need for reliability across the entire software development lifecycle. I want to make the point, hopefully everybody understands this, right? SRE is more than just a new name for sysadmin. I want to make a point clear that observability is way more than just monitoring. And then things like automation and the post-incident review, just to talk a little bit about the evolution in those elements. Good. So you know the term, right? Fundamentally, what happens when you ask a software engineer to design an operations function, you know this. And hopefully you already know our saying in SRE, hope is not a strategy, right? So we hope that the next time we will not have a massive incident. We hope that the capacity will survive the next Black Friday. And hope is certainly not something from an engineering perspective that's sustainable, right? You want to do something about it. And this really leads into SRE. Just to talk a little bit about the need for SRE, because people think SRE is just operations. And I think, yes, absolutely, SRE does incident management. So in ITIL terms, we would call it incident management. In modern, I think it's more incident response. And we do it in a very modern way. Things like, for example, chat ops as a way to not just push tickets from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, but rather jump on a Slack channel and then start collaborating with each other with the aim to restore the service as quick as possible. And absolutely, SREs are also doing problem management, or we rather call that the post-incident review, to treat an incident not only as a fixing opportunity, but also as a learning opportunity, right? To me, problem management really gives me then the backlog of work that I as an SRE should be working on, right? This to get ahead of it and to engineer this problem away. And that's what we call traditionally operations. But obviously, there's still room on the slide, right? SREs are moving way to the left in the software development lifecycle. For example, they control what gets into operations, right? The notion of a production readiness review to make sure that the service is providing the necessary elements for robust, non-disruptive services. And we have different release strategies to slowly and gracefully introduce a new release, a new product into the market, right? Whether it's blue-green deployments, canaries, A/B testing, and the notion of feature flags as example. Dark launches. SRE is also participating in testing, right? Because we want to make sure that there is good quality getting into production. So test automation is quite important. And if you do it the right way, where you start with a test and then the coding, so something that we call test-driven development, you basically get the test like almost as a side effect, right? So I don't have to build the test after the fact. I start with the test and then do the coding against it. And then obviously some really modern topics like chaos engineering, which is, first of all, quite interesting. And I think many of the enterprise customers are looking right now into chaos engineering as a way to gain confidence about the resiliency and the robustness of the service. And SRE also works with the architects and with the developers instrumenting code, and the architects defining reliability patterns, right? Whether charting, queuing, caching, all those kind of things, in order to make sure that the service is robust enough and that could sustain some stress, right? And hopefully the SRE would also work with the product managers or product owners to negotiate how reliable that service should be, right? So should it be 2 nines of availability, 99.9%? Or should it be 5 nines of availability, right? And maybe it's not just availability, maybe it's also responsiveness or durability of the service, right? So negotiating how the business what reliability targets the business has is quite important, because it now allows me then to balance velocity and quality with stability. And then obviously we are living in a platform environment, API economy and so on. The decommissioning of old versions, decommissioning of old services in a graceful way is also something that SREs will be working on. So you see, it really spans the entire software development lifecycle. And sometimes I think in a small environment, you could do that all in one person as an SRE, right? But I think this already leads to a key takeaway, that SRE is really a team sport, right? I'm moving away from SRE as a role, more like an engineering principle, and everybody needs to do some part of the SRE work, right? Whether it's a product owner, the architect, the developer, the tester, the release manager, they all need to do some SRE work. It's not just something you could delegate to one organization or to one persona. Yeah, and that already led to my first statement. SRE is not sysadmin, right? So it's not like lipstick on the pig. It's not a new name of sysadmin. And when I say sysadmin, I'm mainly talking about the people that do firefighting, right? Very reactive, and also from an organization point of view, looking at sysadmin really just as a cost play, right? I need to efficiency, and you saw that, right, through things like offshoring, outsourcing, nearshoring, and then the next wave was with regard to the end of labor arbitrage. We then did automation, but it's all around cost, right? And I think to me, this is one of the exciting things. If I could just show you here, SRE is moving away from this cost play now to a balance between velocity, quality, and efficiency, right? So it's still efficiency, and cost is a key element to it, but it's not all, right? I want to support the business getting new ideas out to the market, to the user, and I would do that in a good quality, right? So the sysadmins are now becoming SREs, and they become, first of all, gatekeepers to control what's in production, right? You know, the error budget discussion about like slowing down or speeding up depending on the how much budget you have left, and they do it as an engineering capacity, right? So things like the famous 50-50 split, where SREs need to be given some time to do the improvements, right? To get ahead of the game, to engineer the problem away. Okay. I also think that we have great collateral, right? The famous books. There are conferences like SRECon. There are meetups like Ricardo and Becerra are hosting, right? So there's a lot of things happening on the SRE community. So let's do a little bit what's happening next, right? I think the time for gatekeeper is probably also getting to a point where they really become partners, right? Partners, advocates of reliability across the organization to the various personas I mentioned before, and not just controlling the production itself, right? I think we are getting to a moment where we democratize SRE. So SRE is really no longer the role, but rather the culture, the engineering discipline across the organization, right? And that means I'm SREing the entire organization, right? Obviously, SRE in the enterprise, right? In the past, SRE was more like a born in the cloud thing. The cloud providers, the software as a service companies, and more enterprises adopting SRE. So SRE for the enterprise. And from there, you see a lot of training happening, certification happens. And we start seeing with some enterprises that it's been recognized by HR that SRE is really a profession, right? So in IBM, we created SRE as a profession last year because we recognize that SRE is very different to a sysadmin. It's also different to a developer. And unless we recognize the profession of SRE in the HR system, in the job families, we might not attract the right talent, and we might not be able to retain the right talent, right? So we need to give them a career path, do proper compensation, all those kind of HR functions which are important to identify the right people. The one thing that strikes me is the last point here, Stack Overflow for ops. I never understood why that doesn't exist, right? Stack Overflow is the tool for developers. If they have a question, they go to Stack Overflow and get a lot of answers to the questions. And this does not really exist in the operations side, right? There are some in pockets, but not in that massive element like you see in development. And I think as a community, we certainly could learn from each other. We could help each other. So I think hopefully we get to this notion of a Stack Overflow for ops or Stack Overflow for SREs to help each other and to learn from each other. So that's the first element. The next one, want to motivate a little bit monitoring, right? You've probably seen this Rumsfeld quadrant for monitoring, right? The known knowns and the known unknowns and so on. And obviously, when you have a known detection, right, it could be a monitoring if you know how to do it. And if you don't know how to deal with it, then it's what we call an incident, right? But if you are not monitoring it, right, it's either a monitoring gap that you forgot to set up a monitor or a certain metric, or it could even lead to a so-called black swan, where you just find out because the customer is calling you or because somebody is tweeting on you, you go to services like Down Detector, and they will tell you that your service is down, which is really a bad thing, a bad reputation. If you take those 4 quadrants, I think it's quite nice to then say, okay, why do we move from monitoring to observability, right? When we talk about observability, it's always like logging, metric, and traces, and maybe also health check, right? And let's map that together. Obviously, for the knowns, right, I could use like monitoring and logging, right? But for the unknowns, this is where tracing comes into play. This is for logging, not on the alerting point of view, but on the debug level, on the information level, comes into play. And this is where I think it's important that you are really having those 3 or 4 elements of your observability strategy, because more and more it's not the knowns that you need to deal with, because SREs have been working on those, right? They engineered the problem away. They did the automation. So we should focus our attention more on the unknowns. And this is where those modern things like tracing come into play. And some people have spotted it, right? I called it root causes. We obviously don't want to talk about root causes anymore, right? It's more the contributing factors, right? Because you have so much redundancy in your architecture that there is no longer a single root cause. It's more multiple things coming together, and that led to the incident. Okay. So with this as a backdrop, this is how I see observability being way more than monitoring, right? Monitoring, we've done this with the thresholds, monitoring, triggering alerts, and you probably use those 2 themes about use and red, one for resources and one for requests, to describe a little bit how I do monitoring. We now move into observability, metric, log, traces, and health check, right? And now the support is no longer just alerting and events, right? Now it's investigation, capacity planning, business insights. So much richer in content what observability now does these days. And the trends that I see here is obviously instrumentation in a shift left model. So I'm not creating the monitors after the fact, but rather it's really a task of the developer, right? They need to instrument the code, they need to do the metrics and the labels and so on. They need to expose those data as part of their service, and probably not just the technology data, but also business data, right? The value of whatever transaction you do in your service, right? We obviously move away from a focus on systems into more services and applications. That's obviously. And I think there's also an evolution of standards, which I think is quite impressive, that you now start seeing some standards how I should expose metric data, right? Whether it's label-based or span-based, open metrics or open telemetry. I think those standards are evolving, and the vendors are picking up those standards, and hopefully that makes it easier for us to instrument code and to derive higher value out of it. Service meshes, I think, is also quite emerging these days, right? Where I said, okay, instead of me doing everything in each individual element, the thought here is, can I put like a service mesh on top of it and just derive sufficient information out of this mesh, right? I think time will tell if that is sufficient or not. I think it's certainly a good start to have like maybe a level 1 observability through service meshes. And then to go deeper, you need to have those things like instrumentation and so on. And AIOps, I think today you would not get any presentation without having AIOps dropped somewhere. I think every vendor talks about AIOps these days. And I think here time will tell how much AIOps is real and how much is just hype. Next one is toil, right? Toil, you know this, right? Manual, repetitive work. And important is it scales linear or ideally sublinear that you want, or actually it scales more than linear to the service growth, right? And I want to address toil because otherwise I need to throw more people into this problem. I need to have more automation scripts and so on. So the aim is to really grow sublinear as the service grows. Okay, now automation means multiple things to multiple people, right? So it could be automation on the infrastructure level, it could be automation on the application level, and it could do automation very much on the day 2 side, on the day 1 side, all the way to the day 0 side, right? So I try to put in some of those automation opportunities, whether it's self-healing and auto-scaling and so on. It could be provisioning of services, right? And obviously runbook automation being a critical element of automation. But I think what you see here is that those capabilities become increasingly part of the platform, like Kubernetes that does auto-scaling and self-healing and so on for you, right? And I think there's also the notion of infrastructure as code, the notion of immutable systems. I'm no longer patching systems, I'm just redeploying, right? Things like test-driven development, test automation leading into continued monitoring, instrumentation like we discussed about, and then dark launches. So more and more automation makes this domain richer and richer. And I think the guiding principles are, on one side, deflection and self-service. So shift left. Other people, no longer ops is responsible, but rather people who are building that service, who are building the landscape, are getting responsible. And the other theme I see is codifying it similar to applications, right? The notion of Git ops. So do what developers doing with Git and pull requests and CI/CD pipelines, and we now do it for configuration and for management artifacts as well. Okay, so with this, automation absolutely is way more than just runbook automation, right? So automation in the past is very reactive, right? Simple tasks. And now we are moving into infrastructure as code, GitOps, and we want to deflect problems, right? We want to engineer the problem away, right? Trends I see here is, first of all, everything is code, right? So it's no longer just the code of the application or the code of an automation script. It's any configuration, any parameter, any artifact being now deployed similar as code, right? And that goes all the way to data and to models. With all this automation, which is great and absolutely needed, I fear a little bit there's a fate of institutional knowledge, right? So can people continue to go deep, right? Because we have so many abstraction layers, right? Operating system, virtualization, hypervisor, container manager. And I fear a little bit by having so much automation, people might not really know what's going on under the covers. And that's okay, unless you have a real big problem, because then you might not have anymore the experts that really know their Linux, that really know their stack, that really know their containers. So I'm a little bit concerned about this, that there is a fate of institutional knowledge. But to sum it up here, we are moving from looking at systems in a pets versus cattle approach now to containers. And I think the next would be applications, that one application is like the other in a factory model. And that would be very exciting to see that as a way in the enterprise. Okay, and last but not least, I want to talk about post-incident reviews, right? And deliberately, this is maybe a not known term, but I want to make a point here, right? Root cause analysis, it's known, right? But it implies that there is like a single root cause. And I think we all know that there are probably multiple things happening at the same time. And this is where we are moving away from the term RCA into something that we call post-incident review, right? We are moving away from a blame game into a blameless way to dig deep and finding out what happened. So a blameless culture. And obviously, human errors should never exist. I never understood why why people think there's a human error. It should always be the system that enables that human to do something wrong. So it's human error is an anti-pattern for sure. We are moving also into some interesting methodologies, right? 5 whys is being used across the industry. There was a great article that moves from 5 whys to infinite hows. And that might be just a small thing, but I think by asking a question, how, allows you to ask a story, to tell a story, right? You're not just hunting for a confirmation and you want to blame somebody. No, you're asking for a story. Tell me the story and make it broader and make it bigger. And this is where a simple change from why to how makes a big difference. But there are others like Ishikawa, Kepner-Trego. So there are more and more methodologies how to do a better job in investigation. I think we're getting into the notion of awareness of different biases, right? Whether it's confirmation bias, whether it's negativity bias, and so on. And this is important to really do a good job in finding out what's happening, right? That you're not just hunting for confirmation, but rather be open-ended, be fact-based in order to understand what happened. Really treating incidents as a learning opportunity. And in order to learn, you need to dig deep, right? So the trends here, obviously, I see there's a brilliant opportunity for tool support. You probably saw the news that there's even in the startup space recently some funding and investment happening. Just today there was another investment, that there is opportunity for startups to build more capacity in this area. Wheel of Misfortune, don't confuse that with game days and chaos engineering. Wheel of Misfortune is something where you start collecting incidents, screenshots from dashboards and so on, as a way to train people for the next on-call job next week, right? So throw them a dashboard, throw them an event or a PagerDuty alert, and said, okay, this is what you see. What are the things that you do next, right? Wheels of Misfortune as an institutionalized way to learn and to prepare for the on-call job. Another shift I see is something that's the industry called Safety 1 and Safety 2. Safety 1 is more this what went wrong, and Safety 2 is focusing on what went well, right? So what are the things that we prevented? So the incident that did not materialize, right? Mm-hmm. Because this is also something you could learn from, right? You are not learning only from mistakes. You are also learning from things that went well, right? So the Safety 2 is changing the perspective a little bit also in this focus on the preventative incidents. And the last I want to call out, because this is also a trend to be very transparent, learning from mistakes. Not only learning from mistakes in your organization, but also learning from mistakes from others, right? And this is not to say, haha, look what happened to them. No, it's learning from it, and could it happen to me? What can I do in order to improve, right? And there's a great repository. I put a link here on the slides, where postmortems are being posted in the intranet. And I make it a habit every Friday to take one or two of those documents and just read and take some learnings out of it, right? Maybe also thinking about, like, could it happen to me? Could it happen to my clients? Could it happen to my company, right? So brilliant opportunity that you learn from mistakes, not only in your ecosystem, but also with other people in the industry. So those are a few examples. There could be more if there would be more time. I think I'm running out of time now. Certainly AOps is a key theme. I think time will still tell if SRE and AOps are supporting each other or competing. I feel like if I do a good job as an SRE, I don't see those repetitive patterns anymore. So then maybe AOps would be limited in its capacity. Time will tell. Obviously, there's a lot of opportunity in this area, but we need to see how AOps and SRE work together. And the other thing which I think is really important from an environmental perspective is something we call responsible computing, where maybe I apply my engineering rigid to think about carbon emission on the code, carbon emission or electricity emission on the network, right? Efficient use of resources. If I have a batch job, should it really run on a day, or could it run at night to make more efficient use of energy and so on? I think we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our children, we owe it to the environment to think about, from an SRE perspective, from an engineering perspective, if there's something we could do to contribute saving the planet, and think about like a demand optimization, resource consumption, and so on. Okay, with this, I want to close. This is fine. This is our logo that we use in SRE, right? And we have a Brazilian Portuguese environment, so este bom, right? That's what I think I want to see on all of your slides. And as I'm from Munich, I translate that into a Bavarian, so pascho. That's how we say it in Bavarian with a Stein. Thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to any discussion. Thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you very much, Ingo. There are some questions here. The first one from Shami Ahmed. Shami is an expert from Broadcom, also a master, and he always brings good insights, great insights. And he just asking about the testing production, ability to roll back quickly, logically. It's not exactly chaos engineering, but with very granular release. What's your opinion on that?
So I think chaos engineering, first of all, is a fresh approach to things that people have done in the past in a like a sandbox environment, and now we are taking it more serious. Many clients looking into this element right now. I don't think that they are yet there to do it in production, right? It's still doing it in a safe zone, safe harbor. But once they gain confidence, I think they are getting more bold and more accepted to do the same also in a production environment. And I think there's probably a need to it, right? Because you just don't have the scale and you don't have the data to test everything in your sandbox. Some elements are inevitable that you need to run that in a production environment. But I think you first need to do your homework. If you already know that you have a problem, there's no point in testing it out, right? So I think it's a maturity statement that you do it right now in a safe zone, and then over time it will be done in a production environment. It's a matter of maybe 1 or 2 years, and then the enterprise will be there. I'm absolutely confident on this.
Good. Ricardo, I'm just curious about the question we're going to make to Ingo.
I'm hearing some echo. Not switch. Sure, it's only me, but
Yeah, there's some
uh,
echo, yeah, but okay.
okay. I think it's fixed now. So Ingo, I'm gonna try to make an intelligent question for you, right? So we are past the point where in the industry we thought, okay, I think I know what SRE is. So I think today most people know what it is, and a lot of people say, okay, I need SREs. And I think you were very precise when you said we are changing from the role of a reliability engineer into a collection of practices, but and we need to develop those practices. So how do you see the development of this? In my mind, what I'm trying to articulate with friends, with customers, is that SRE is dependent upon a path. So you need to know what practice to develop. It's dependent upon the context. So it's not the same for everybody, for every industry, for every technology landscape, and it depends on time. You won't become an effective SRE or you won't master the practices overnight. So how do you think it's a good approach to develop the practices in the enterprise, and how they should start?
Yeah, you're spot on in your statement. To me, I think it's important to understand how far you could go, right? But then you need to translate that into your specific environment, right? Whether it's your tech stack and your culture, your organizational constraints, right? The skill that you have and so on. And I think it's important that you're not trying to do everything just by the books, right? I think it's important that you start somewhere, and I would make it very targeted to say, okay, this is the problem that we have in our organization, and let me address this, and how would an SRE solve it? And then from there, gain confidence that it can be done, that it can be done with your resources, and then add more and more of those SRE tenants to it, right? I would certainly not advise to try to do everything at once. And also maybe not across the entire organization, right? Maybe you want to handpick a service or handpick a business unit and prove SRE there, and from there scale out. I see some customers failing because they try to do everything at once, trying to boil the ocean, but then it's not moving the needle, right? It's yes, I do SRE, but it's not effective, right? It's not deeming the results that I'm looking for. And that's where my advice would be very selective, and then gain confidence and then scale from there, right?
Great. Can I just expand on this a little bit?
Sure.
So I love that picture, that hive with different tenets of SRE and different practices, and a lot of them are transferable. For example, we would probably understand how to do TDD, BDD, instant response, and that would be applicable for different scenarios, for different enterprises. But do you see a trend where in the industry we are going to start combining them into something that will make sense specifically for that given enterprise? For example, we know that design reviews or having a reference architecture that's continually updated, it's only applicable for a given enterprise because they know how to do that for them. And I think it's a combination of things that are horizontal, that applies to everybody, and then we are going to start combining those things into a specific set of capabilities that it's only applicable for a specific enterprise or industries.
No, well, absolutely, right. When I talk about architectural patterns, right, you need to have those patterns and maybe some sample implementations of it. A production readiness review should have very objective way to articulate what does it take to be in production, right? Observability benefits from having insight across the entire tech stack, right? Absolutely. But to me, that's the second step, right? I need to first prove it out, right? I need to first show that observability is effective to me, right? And once I've done this, then I could say, okay, now let's do observability across, right? I'm very much in favor of more like a grassroots bottom-up approach to prove it and then scale, and not just do this artificial reference architecture and you shall do, and people don't see the value of it, right? So you're right. And I think my point is the approach to it should be very iteratively, right? The destination will be the same, but I want to be very iterative on this. Right, and then I think that's what you see in DevOps, right? DevOps, we move away from this waterfall into agile sprints, 2 weeks, retrospectives, learn from it, and the same is true here as well.
Ingo, there are brand new companies coming up with very, bright solutions on the market, right? We just mentioned one that is Blameless. They just received a B series fundraising.
30 million. I should have invested.
Those days, right? And so in fact. I know, Ricardo, we had the opportunity to talk to Ashar from Blameless a few years ago, and they are just starting, but very interesting. Which are those big interesting companies that you could recommend the audience to look up and trying to at least have a look, because they could help them to leverage or speed up the implementation of SRE. It has, for instance, Blameless.
Okay. Yeah. So let's. I need to be careful, right? Because I'm not representing IBM for the next 5 minutes or so, right? Because otherwise, I don't know what they would do. But I think there are some interesting companies in the market, right? You mentioned Blameless. I think that's a nice company to look into ChatOps and see if it would expedite the things like incident management, problem management. And there are other companies like Fire Hydrant who do similar things, right? Then we talked about Chaos Engineering, and obviously Gremlin is the leader in this area from a product perspective.
I had the opportunity to visit Gremlin in California as well with Call to Andrew.
Yeah. Another company I would probably call out is Launch Darkly. They do feature flags and feature toggles. I think they have a really nice portfolio on this. But it's really hard to mention like individual companies, right? And in observability, there are quite a few, right? Whether it's Zirconius, whether it's Instana, whether it's striking a blank, Honeycomb. There are. And to me, this is fresh, right? That there are so many startups happening, and each have a nice new approach to do things, right? It's no longer these massive frameworks which do things. I think the industry benefits from this startup culture. The one ask that I would have is, I see those companies and everybody has nice features, but I want to have it all together in one solution, right? And not just pick and selecting those capabilities. And the other thing I should also say, so shameless plug on the commercial products, I think it's also amazing what's happening on the open source side, right? In the monitoring side, things like Prometheus, amazing, also Chaos Engineering, Chaos Toolkit, and so on. So I think more and more companies are advised to look into commercial off-the-shelf products, but also look into what's happening in the open source space, and then make a decision what fits their bill. But it's no longer that open source is like a second tier. I think the community is very aggressive and very active in this space.
You have to watch that. Astolfo is coming with a question about Kubernetes. So learn the complexity of Kubernetes and service mesh for just the first level of observability. Is it worth? There are much better benefits, but regarding the observability, what are your opinion about the Kubernetes environment adoption?
I probably need to understand a little bit more the background of this question.
I don't know, Ricardo, you can.
Because I mean, there are multiple points on it, right? Service mesh, complexity, Kubernetes, observability. So I think at this day and age, people absolutely need to look into Kubernetes, right? Because it's getting more and more the de facto layer in IT, right? Obviously, you still have infrastructure as a service, you still have VMware, but if you go into containers, then Kubernetes is, I think they won the battle on the container side. And the downside is that Kubernetes is quite complex, right? When you look at all those features that you need to have and all the capabilities to do it right, that itself, as much as it hides complexity, introduces new complexity on the other side, right? And I think you probably need to go a little bit deeper to really understand and appreciate the value, but also the limitations of Kubernetes. And then observability helps you, right? Maybe the point was more like, how much do I need to do with a service mesh and when to introduce individual monitoring? I think for the time being, you probably need both, right? The service mesh allows you to look into the inter-component communication, the inter-component monitoring, but when you go into a component, you still need a monitoring tool for it. So I think it will be a combination. But you certainly could go to a certain limit with just a service mesh approach.
Ingo, you mentioned everything has a code. You're talking about Kubernetes, but what about legacy? How can you apply SRE to legacy systems, as mainframe, for instance?
Okay, so all I mentioned, blameless postmortems, observability, testing, architecture patterns, there's nothing cloud on it, right? There's not even DevOps on it, right? Obviously, cloud and DevOps makes this much easier to adopt, but it's not a hard requirement, right? So I think you could use those principles in legacy on-premise environments. You could, and we do that in IBM, even apply to the mainframe as a service and to mainframe workload. The point here is you need to break the thinking, right? Because if you still make it just a cost play, you will never be able to be effective, right? If you are not empowered and skilled to affect change, then yes, SRE is great, but you're limited what you can do, right? So SRE can be applied to those environments, but it requires stakeholder and executive buy-in and endorsement to really affect change, because otherwise it's just concepts and theory.
The concept can be used in both segments, right? So there is more questions here, Ingo. One is from Thiago. What's next step for SRE? Shift left of reliability should start from business strategy. And the other that can complement is, what are the main challenges to implement SRE in today's companies?
Okay, so first Thiago's question. So first of all, I don't think that SRE will go away. So I think SRE will stay. It will evolve, right? It will probably look into the business strategy, and quite frankly, with the notion of SLO, we already make a step forward, right? Where you said, okay, let's define from a business perspective, how reliable should the service be, right? I might still not differentiating like different users and do a segmentation of the users. And maybe that's where the next level will come in, where you said, okay, maybe I do a different strategy if it's a known user, a paid user versus a free consumer of the service, right? So taking a little bit the business into account, or how big is the transaction that I'm doing, right? If it's a $10 transaction, I respond differently to a 10,000 transaction. And I give you an example. I just had a conversation with a client where he said, okay, let's stop talking about number of incidents, but rather think about like number of impacted minutes or number of impacted users, because that's a better currency from a user or from a business perspective than the number of incidents, right? 10 incidents might be having less impact than one instance affecting many users, right? The second question, if you could just show that again.
Yes.
What are the challenges, I guess?
Yeah, the challenges for
the challenges. I think the biggest challenge right now is that people have a hard time hiring SREs from the street, right? Because the SREs are a really rare resource, right? They are the perfect blend of developers and sysadmins. And if somebody has SRE on their title, then chances are that the headhunters will call him. So the challenge that enterprises have is, if I cannot hire people from the street, how can I make my people more SRE aware, right? So making developers more ops aware, making the operators more dev aware, so that I get to this perfect blend of both worlds. And this is where training and certification and roadmap and HR functions and so on are super important. So that's one challenge that I see companies have. And then the other is, everybody wants to be one of those hyperscalers who do SRE for 10, 15, 20 years, right? And that's probably not realistic, right? So you need to translate those concepts which are matured over 20 years into your context. And that means setting expectations and be realistic what you can achieve. and don't mimic somebody else if it doesn't fit your environment, your skills, and your capacity, right?
There is
those
a
are
question from Tony. There is asking about the transition from a typical engineer ops teams into an SRE team. But I've heard from someone that in the future, maybe you should not have site reliability engineers, but just the practice of site reliability engineering.
Yeah. To me, I think the name is still valid, right? Because it makes a point, right? Because you emphasize that there's a difference. You emphasize that something else, something new is happening, right? So a new name might create this compelling remark. How should I transition? Well, all the things that we discussed, right? So if you have an incident, don't just do a tick in a box and say, I'm doing an RCA document. Dig deep and said, okay, what can we do to avoid it the next time, right? Can I be faster in detecting it? Can I be faster in isolating it? Can I be faster in mitigating it? Can I make this problem go away, right? So dig deep and then affect change on it, right? That's a very natural thing, right? So you go from an existing practice, whether it's incident management, problem management, and start applying those new ways of working in, right? The other element would be on the very, very front end, defining, okay, how reliable should my service be, right? So we have severity classes, right? So is that service really a severity class 1? And why, and how do I measure it, right? Right now we measure server availability, right? That doesn't mean anything to the user, right? So start being very specific and said, okay, let me define what makes that service available or make that service reliable, right? So one is reactive from incidents and moving to the left. And the other is start up front and said, okay, let's be clear, there's a new service. Let's articulate the non-functional requirements. Let's articulate how reliable that service should be. Those are two starting points. There might be more.
We have one more question from Carlos Chagas about test ops. Do you know, how is this practicing, evolving now, if it's part of SRE?
Yeah, there's a proliferation of ops, right? Test ops, model ops, data ops, right? To me, test ops is codifying testing, right? Codifying with mock plugs to the consumer and to the provider, maybe having master data management and test data management activities. I think it is important to start thinking about how can I get ahead of the time to testing, right? That I'm not doing like on a best effort basis testing, but rather do it as a systemic approach to testing. But I think it need to be embedded, right? That's where I'm driving test-driven development, for example, quite big, right? Because otherwise your tester is always just reactive, right? Getting the code and let me write a test script, right? And thinking about the SRE concept, I want to get ahead of it, right? So if you start with a test and then codifying against it to make the test flip from from false to true, I think gives you a better approach. And then test ops with codifying it is then the environment where how you could execute it. But I think there need to be a methodology to it, right? Like TDD and BDD.
Okay, Ingo. So you are almost run out of time, but I'd like to have one more comment from Ricardo.
I think there was one important aspect you brought up, Ingo, that I wanted to expand. Over time, we saw some technologies become invisible as part of the platform. So as some practices, we are seeing some practices being transferred to the platform rather than having one person executing it. So I think I want to see your perspective, expanding what Astolfo just said. We are seeing this development, there's expansion of Kubernetes, this ecosystem. We are betting a lot on this. And some of the practices, observability, a lot of telemetry is part of the platform. Do you see this as a tendency? We are seeing more and more practices become sort of invisible as part of the platform. And I think you mentioned while you were talking some of the pitfalls, some of the concerns we have because we might become inefficient, or we might lose track of what's happening under the hood.
Yeah, I think so, and I feel this is probably for the good way, right? And if you compare that to automotive, right? Do I really need to know how the engine works, right? Do I need ever open the hood, right? Because I can do anything anyway, right? So I could reduce the complexity. It's now part of the engine, and the same is true for IT, right? I don't need, and I should not, right? The flip side, Ricardo, and this is what you're referring to, is there still need to be some people who know. Right? You cannot say we as an industry do not need to know Linux anymore, right? Because we do Kubernetes, nobody needs to know Linux. I think that's a very dangerous statement, right? And you say, well, in the industry it will not work, right? There are companies who still sells Linux, right? But in the company, right, in the bank, in the insurance, there still need to be people who know Linux, right? Even if you go full blown into Kubernetes, and maybe even if you go full blown into the cloud, you still need to know networking. You still need to know storage. You still need to know Linux, right? So I think there's a risk that we attempt to oversimplify, and that's what I meant with the decay of institutional knowledge. That could be very risky, right? If nobody knows what's going on, in good times, perfect, right? But the SREs unfortunately are there for the bad times, right? And this is where you need that skill.
Very good. Ingo, I heard some from a site reliability engineer at Capital One. He said, train the calm before the storm, so you'll be calm in the storm, right? So
exactly.
That's be prepared. So I'd like to thank you very much, Ingo. I know Ingo. In fact, I have to confess, Ingo just hosted me in Raleigh, hosted me in San Francisco, and just brought this this reminder. Remember that at IBM in Raleigh, right? So, and also that was in San Francisco. Remember, I was with Mauricio and Thiago. And for those who don't know,
and you have the book. You have the book, the Cloud Adoption Playbook.
For those who don't know, this is the Ingo's book, the Cloud Adoption Playbook, right?
Yep.
So that's very interesting. I really recommend. And in case we have some time, it's interesting to read, and gonna learn a little bit about cloud and about SRE and all those interesting practices. Ingo, thank you very much. Ricardo, thank you very much as well to be with us. That's always fun be together, and hope you can, see you soon here in Brazil, Ingo. I know we have business to do in Brazil, soon. And and I know things in Munich is still wet, but
it's raining right now. Thanks for having me, Bozera, and I hope to see you soon live again, whether it's Munich, whether it's San Francisco or Sao Paulo. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you very much. I saw just so many friends here with us. Sending. Everybody likes your talk. So it will be a pleasure to have you here. And Ricardo certainly will trying to organize a personal meetup here in São Paulo, right, Ricardo? When Ingo comes.
Yes. First thing, after the lockdown is over, we're gonna have one.
Count me in.
On-site meetup, yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Hey guys,
thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingo, and see you next time. And let's repeat that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.